There are many types of podcast formats that you can use to build brand awareness and to generate high quality leads for your business. And in this episode, I'm going to be going over 3 types that are perfect for your business. I'll define them, give you some pros and cons, and even discuss some examples. So let's get started. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Inside the Offer. I am your host, Nick Chamberlain, and if you haven't heard of me, I have been in the podcast and radio industry since 2014, and since then, I have produced and edited over 7,000 episodes and counting, and now I want to share with you everything that I have learned. But when it comes to Inside the Offer, this started because of my love of starting and growing a business. So the purpose of this podcast is to dive deep into a business and into an industry and to learn everything behind the scenes of how they operate. For this next season of the podcast, we are going to be going over everything in the full service podcast production industry. So we're going to be learning everything about production, recording, software, editing, anything that has to do with building and growing your business utilizing this medium for podcasting, we are going to be going over. So without further ado, let's get into this episode and learn about the different types of podcasts you can use to build and grow your business. So the first podcast type we're going to be going over is the branded podcast. The branded podcast is a show that aligns with your company's values and mission statement. The purpose of it is to build and grow your audience and to continue to grow your brand, especially in the online format. So some pros about this type of podcast is that it's very versatile. You can pick any genre, any format, as long as the show is in line with your overall company's values, ethics, and morals, and overall mission statement in growing your business and growing your overall brand. It allows you to connect with your customers in a personal way. Yes, they can see your billboard over I-35, but if they're listening to a podcast that's aligned with your values and your brand, and they're getting to know your host in a very intimate way, there's really no other way to connect to your audience in such a very intimate format. And another pro is that this type of podcast is going to be more of a top of funnel awareness, where other podcast formats are more of your middle of funnel nurturing, which we'll get into. But it's also great because you're able to take multiple pieces of content from this long audio video format, and then you can use that on all your other social media sites to share and to overall bring awareness to your brand. And in this podcast format, you can also get sponsors and advertisements, or if the show is not specifically about your company can sponsor each episode and you just put in some product advertisements of your company. All right, so some cons about this format is if you are just starting your business and you don't have a lot of leads coming in and you don't have a big audience, this is probably not the best type of podcast to get into right away, because you have other things you have to worry about, like lead gen that you need right now. So you don't really need to start spending too much time on creating a branded podcast. So get some clients in, get them going, make sure the cash flow is optimized and working well, and then move into the branded podcast. And another con is these podcasts need to be top notch. They need to be high quality. The sound needs to be great. The audio needs to be great. The host and the guest, the way you interview, everything just needs to be top notch. Because if you have a low quality podcast that you're trying to make as a branded podcast, it might not look so good on your brand. So the higher the quality, the better it is going to be. Again, we want to make sure the podcast is high quality, the content is premium, and that the hosts and the guests are always on top of their game. Another con is it can be very expensive to get this high quality. If you're having to hire talent, whether it comes to hiring your own hosts or hiring guests to be on, it is going to be expensive. And of course, if you're going to be doing in-person, getting a film crew, and then hiring a professional production company to do all the post-production, everything starts to add up. And especially if you want to make this branded podcast part of your marketing campaign, then you need to make sure that it is high quality. And if it's high quality, it's going to be a little more expensive. So just be aware of that. Some examples that I've come across over the years is the PBD podcast, Patrick Bet David. So that is actually a news and commentary podcast. He's not really selling any of his entrepreneurship classes or any of the insurance or any other things he does with his business. It's just growing his overall brand. I also came across Gatorade's The Secret to Victory podcast. It is a short 9-episode series, and every episode just talks about how an athlete became a great athlete. But it's not really talking about Gatorade and how Gatorade became a great sports drink. And another one I was thinking of was, I was just doing some research on some companies, and I saw that Yeti did not have a podcast. So Yeti could have a podcast on anything about wilderness or camping, okay, right? Because they have a bunch of coolers and drinks and just outdoor activities. Any show on camping or hunting or fishing would do well. And also, Yeti is in the center of downtown Austin. So even having a podcast on what it's like to do business in Austin would also help it grow its brand. But of course, what makes a difference is it's not a podcast on coolers. It's not a podcast on Gatorade. And it's not a podcast on entrepreneurship. They are podcast episodes that are just building the overall brand and mission of the company. All right, let's get into the second type of podcast. So this is going to be called the Lead Nurture Podcast. This is a value-driven podcast that aims to provide solutions and advice for your target client. The purpose is to nurture high-quality leads into sales. So let's get into the pros. One of the pros is it's a great way to grow an audience. If you don't have an audience at all, then starting a value-driven podcast will be able to give you stake in the ground of what you are going to be an expert in, and then you start producing some content, some value-driven content for your target client, and then you're going to start building an audience based on those who find you interesting and valuable and helpful. Another great thing about this format, it's going to give you a ton of short form content. So if you have a 30-minute value-packed episode with a bunch of different bullet points of high-quality value and advice, and then you're going to be able to take snippets of that and put it on your YouTube Shorts and onto your Instagram Reels or LinkedIn profile page, and to give you an overall boost in your content marketing strategies. And then you'll notice once you have leads coming in and you're asking them how they heard about you or why are they deciding to move forward with you, you'll notice that the ones listening to your podcast are the most high quality leads that you will be receiving. And then you'll notice that the leads who are contacting you from listening to your podcast, they're going to be the ones who are most likely to hire you or purchase your product. So some cons about this format, it's not too versatile. You pretty much have to craft a show around your target client. So you have to make sure that your podcast show is in the genre that they're listening to, and you have to make sure that you are providing value in each episode so that they can keep coming back and keep listening to you. And another con is you need to be consistent. You have to do this week after week because you might not have that big team behind you. You might not have that big audience. And so it's going to be very important to be consistent with the production of this Lead Nurture podcast. But another thing is that's great. Let's go back to a pro real quick. Once it's out there, it's always out there. So once you're 100 episodes in, once you have new audience members coming into your ecosystem, a lot of them will start at episode 1 and they're going to crank through them all. All right, so some great examples for this podcast format is The Graham Cochran Show. Another one is The Future with Chris Do. And a third is The Six Figure Creative with Brian Hood. Alrighty, so those are 3 great examples if you want to hear how they are utilizing this podcast format for their business. All right, let's get into the third and final podcast type that you can use to grow your business. So this one is going to be the networking podcast. This podcast is designed to showcase the host network and to grow their personal network as well. One of the great pros with this is that you get to connect and meet with many individuals. A lot of the times you might be able to sit down with individuals you normally wouldn't be able to sit down with, but because you have a podcast, you will be able to do that. It's also great for your business because let's just say you have a specific client, you could always invite them onto your podcast. This would be a great way to nurture them and have them becoming warm leads. You have a great hour conversation. They know who you are a little more intimately now. And then one day when you go to offer your service to them, they're going to know you and be more willing to hire you for your services. Another amazing pro with this is that you just get to continue to grow and learn. Just if you find someone who is more knowledgeable than you or somewhere that is where you want to be, and you can sit down with them for about an hour and to network and to discuss, it's an amazing pro. All right, but this one also has quite a number of cons. It is very difficult to grow an audience and to gain listenership with this kind of podcast because a lot of the times it's not going to be very valuable or pertinent to the listener because you're going to be talking to a bunch of people, maybe in a bunch of random industries, maybe they're not so well known, and you're just not going to really grow your show into a very large show if that's what you're looking to do. And if you're looking for clients who are listening to the show, this is probably not the best medium or type of podcast for you as well. And also, it is more technically and logistically challenging than the other ones. You have to coordinate with guests. You have to figure out recording times. You got to figure out how you're going to record them. Is it going to be on Zoom? Is it going to be on Riverside? A lot of the times people have a lot of technical challenges, and especially if they don't do a lot of podcast interviews and they're going to be using their built-in webcam, they're going to be using their built-in mic. So a lot of the conversations are not the most high quality, and overall it's just going to be a little more challenging when you get into recording podcast episodes. Another con is more likely than not, you're going to burn out after 20 to 30 episodes of coordinating with the guests and talking with them. And you'll be like, all right, I've grown my network enough. This is good. Let me go work on something else with my business. Or at this point, you could transition to a branded podcast or to a value-driven podcast where you're talking about things that you want to talk about that light you up. And that's how you're going to get out of that burnout phase. So a lot of people I work with have these kind of podcast formats. Maybe you're listening, you've been invited on one of them, and maybe it's just a bunch of podcasts that you're seeing that are being advertised where it's just the host interviewing a guest. They talk about their life story, and there's really no value being given to the audience. There's no specific theme. It's just people talking about whatever they want, whenever they want. And yeah, I'm not going to get into specific examples. I'll just let you decide on which one is a network podcast. All right, so that does it for this episode of Inside the Offer. Thank you so much for listening. And if you're thinking about starting a podcast, or if you have a friend that's starting a podcast, send them this episode so that it will help them to decide which kind of podcast episode should they start for their business. And of course, if you found this episode helpful in any way, please leave a comment down below if you're listening on YouTube, and let me know which podcast type that do you have or that you're thinking about launching. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please rate and review. This will help the show grow so I can help more people to produce their podcasts and that we can have higher quality podcasts in the world of podcasting. Alrighty, thank you guys so much. Have a blessed day.